Hello, 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 everyone, and welcome to another edition of Collateral Nation. Today is going to be an incredible edition because we have a very special guest, Dr. Kevin Morgan. He's actually a PhD and he's a veterinarian, retired veterinarian, but he is a pad warrior. He's just a force to be reckoned with. Just wait until you hear how he has been able to run marathons, even an Ironman triathlon with PAD and an AAA, an aortic, abdominal aortic aneurysm, which he had stented. So this is going to be an incredible story you don't want to miss. But first, I want to welcome my co-host and the amazing global walking therapy researcher of the year for 2024, Dr. Chris Seenan. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Nice to be here.
So before we get into Kevin's story, talking about how collateral vessels are the holy grail and how to build them and how he's built them to maintain his legs into his 80s, we did have a question that came up in our network just overnight. And it was a patient who said her doctor, her vascular surgeon, told her there's no point in walking. He doesn't see the purpose in it because you can't stop the progression of disease. It happens. And if you're destined to lose your leg, you're destined to lose your leg. Nothing you can do is going to prevent that. That was a little disconcerting. And we had another doctor that jumped in and said, well, there are certain areas, yes, in acute situations with clots or in lower abdominal areas like the iliac arteries or the aorta, they may not grow collateral vessels like they do below. So there might be moments or situations where walking may not be as effective, but I wanted to throw it off to you to respond to this vascular surgeon's assertion that walking doesn't work.
Yeah, thank you. It is it's an interesting comment, and I think almost maybe the issue is with the how general the comment is and how sweeping and broad it is rather than necessarily the content, because I think as has been clarified, there are situations when perhaps walking isn't going to have the same effect as it will do in other situations. And the other thing to recognize is that everyone's presentation is different, everyone's experience is different, and the other comorbidities or other associated factors, other things going on in the body is different for each individual. So absolutely, I think that it's really important that everyone takes their own physician, their own doctor's advice, because their own physician will be the one who knows their body the best and knows exactly what's going on. So absolutely, that's the priority. I think what's important to note in this situation is to kind of dig down into what was what's the truth there? What's going on? And I think the couple of points I would pick up on are, yes, certainly for these larger arteries. Okay, so they're talking about your aorta or your iliac arteries, which are kind of up into your stomach or into your groin. These are larger ones, and if they are blocked or occluded, then the impact further down the arterial tree into the leg is quite significant. And then if you imagine, well, what size would the collateral vessel need to be to substitute for the normal amount of flow that would go through that larger, thicker vessel, then it's going to be significant. So therefore, I can appreciate why collaterals might not be as effective in that situation with a blockage that's quite high up. There's also the case where the blockage might not be due to the kind of atherosclerosis or the kind of furrowing and narrowing and hardening of their arteries that we normally talk about. And it might be to do with kind of clotting factors within the blood, and the blood being, well, sometimes people talk about the blood being sticky or more likely to kind of have clots rather than necessarily just be narrower and harder. So in those situations, absolutely yes. Then it doesn't, the disease doesn't behave the same, and therefore the walking might be different. And that's what I think is the key thing, is to kind of understand your own presentation, your own disease, and what's going on. To talk in a generality that walking doesn't work, absolutely, I would disagree though, because as we always talk about, there's more than one reason why you walk. You walk to grow these collateral vessels and improve your function, walk further, but there's also walking for health reasons and for cardiovascular health in general. And so even though that walking might not be helping your pad and growing these collaterals to the same extent as it might be if your blockage was elsewhere, it is going to be protective of your heart and your other organs and the other reasons why you might walk and why you might exercise. So just make sure you have that proper appreciation of what's going on.
Yes, definitely. Good answer. Thank you so much, Dr. Seenan. So, what do you think we bring Kevin Morgan in? He is the author of How to Fight the Crippling Pain of Peripheral Artery Disease. And I wondered if you had a chance to take a look and kind of skim through the book. It's kind of interesting, right? Probably some things that you'd never heard about before. Here's a patient where, Dr. Seenan, there isn't as much out there on peripheral artery disease except for basic walking. What were your initial thoughts before we bring in Kevin and we start to, put his feet to the fire, literally?
I just thought it was fantastic to kind of learn about this perspective and Kevin's unique approach to the disease and understanding of the condition and bringing, obviously, Kevin, I'm sure you'll expand on this further, but your previous life experience and your understanding of of pathology to the condition and really problem solving around the issues that you had. And I think that was so really impressive for me and how hard you've worked, thought about this, but then also shared it with other people. I think that was the impressive thing that I saw.
What's been a little frustrating for him, though, is actually getting general doctors here in the US to actually listen to what he's having to say and taking what he's doing seriously, and even going to the extent of saying to their patients, hey, you might want to pick up this book. And it's hard to understand why, when he's not giving medical advice, he's literally saying this really worked for me, so why not try it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that it's an interesting about generally the healthcare professions, and I think people are often cautious about, because I suppose it relates to what we just talked about at the beginning of this conversation about general advice not being appropriate for each individual. So everyone's always cautious about where the advice comes from and what and what it means and how people act on that. But what I think is not appreciated and should be appreciated more is just, well, Kevin's someone living with this condition and therefore the expert in this condition, and therefore that is, I would be prioritizing Kevin's message, I suppose, and I'm trying to understand it and more.
Fantastic. Well, I think we should loop in Kevin. Kevin, welcome. Thank you so much for sharing your book with us.
My pleasure.
So I
have
think
a question. One question.
sure.
Where are you from, Chris? You got an accent. Is it north of England?
It's Scotland, yes, so very north of England, yeah.
We lived in Pennycook for 5 years. Two of our kids
Uh,
were born
really? Oh, I know Pennycook very well. That's over the other side of the country. I'm in Glasgow and the West Coast at the moment, but yeah. Oh, fantastic.
So you
there.
have a lot
I
to
would
relate to.
depend on questions, right? I'll just respond to questions.
You can ask any questions you want, Kevin. I think that would make for it. Let's just have a conversation about it. But I just thought, I would start, Kevin, when you sat down to write this book, there was a lot that was missing in the education of peripheral artery disease patients on going beyond walking to build those collateral vessels, correct? Nothing really to the extent that would help you run marathons, let alone walk.
No, I was actually very surprised. I was surprised by the behavior of my endovascular surgeon, who is really good, Mark Farber. I mean, he's done a great job helping me with the problem with my aortic aneurysm, which I self-diagnosed. I worked out what was going on in an Ironman race, 10 miles into the run. And then I went to my personal physician and explained what was going on. And she told me she didn't think anything was happening in my abdomen and wanted me to leave. So I insisted on a script for an ultrasound, went across the road, 6.9, AAA, 6.9. And she wanted me to just go home. And so there she let me down. I never saw her again, and she never followed up on my script. That's number one. number two, I mean, physicians have helped me a lot. I don't want to talk about putting down physicians. They have too many things to deal with. They're busy, the pressure of the HMOs and all that stuff. But then years later, I'm talking to Mark Farber. They ran the ABI test. I mean, my symptoms started in 2014 for PAD, and they ran ABI, and clearly I had serious blockage of my right popliteal, which is now essentially fully blocked. And I have no dorsal pedal pulse at all can be detected. In fact, they couldn't find one with ultrasound. My partner is a nurse. I got her to test it again a couple of days ago. Nothing. I had a detailed ultrasound recently, and this is what really surprised me. Two things. Number one, the technician told me about all the collaterals she could see, but none of them were in the hospital report online, which is weird. And then I talked to Mark about what I could do about this problem. And I asked if he could do an angioplasty or put in a stent. And he rightly said that would risk losing my leg. And it turns out that has occurred. I read about that recently. And he said I should do 3 30-minute walks a week. This is totally inadequate. It's showing no interest in the patient's power over their own body. I don't want to criticize Mark. I understand where he's coming from. I mean, he has patients of all shapes and sizes, and some of them would not benefit from what I do. So the problem I have is really, why don't the physicians listen to what I'm doing? I have pathology training. I'm a member in good standing of the Royal Society of Pathology in England. So I have medical training. I'm respected by the MDs in England, and I get no response. I do not understand it, because I'm trying now to go through nurse practitioners who I think might be more open to listening and giving advice to patients. I thought my book would fly off the shelves, which would help me cover my marketing expenses, but nothing, just silence.
It's interesting because in our group, Dr. Seenan, his book does get a lot of interest, and we were able to buy a bunch of copies and give them to the patients, and they love them. And the exercises really do help to improve their quality of life, especially for the tingling, the burning, the neuropathy in the feet. They find his exercises, his toe yoga, to be very helpful.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I can imagine. And it's interesting, as you say, that generic advice that you were provided was, and as you say, was inadequate for you in the state that you were, in the position you were, in the kind of your normal activities. Those 3 times 30 minutes a week was just not right. But that, I suppose, is what our clinical guidelines say, because that is where the research has been done, and that's what they say works for claudication pain. But what I think what is interesting and important to learn from your story is that need to individualize it to you and make sure that what the advice that you provided actually fits with your lifestyle and what you're used to doing. So what kind of thing were you doing at that stage then? How did you start on this journey of kind of figuring out what works for you?
Well, the first symptoms were in 2014. In 2015, ran the ABI test, and Mark told me the result, talked about what I might do. 2 weeks after he told me about the 3 times 30 minutes, I ran a marathon in Maine, came in last, 7 hours, but I finished. It's been steadily getting worse, and so I decided to try and tackle it. But there is a point you need to know. Back in the late 1960s, early 1970s, I was running a platelet function study in humans in Switzerland, and we needed blood to calibrate the agronometer. And so a technician came in and took some of my blood and came back 15 minutes later with a tube, an ignition tube, but it spun down. It turned out my fasting plasma looked like clotted cream. It turned out my triglycerides were over 2,000. And my HDL was less than 20. I realized this was a potential death sentence in my 40s. So I started changing my diet. There was nothing really I could get from physicians. And so I fought it with diet. I brought the HDL went up slightly, but the triglycerides I brought down to the 500s. But then fortunately in my 50s, I started Ironman training. And within a year of Ironman training, my triglycerides went down to below 150 and my HDL went up to 80. And so I can't stop training because this will happen. I knew that atherosclerosis would kick in eventually, which of course it did in 2014. So then I'm faced with the problem. I have to continue training if I don't want my hypertriglyceridemia to kill me sooner. And I love training, but the PAD is progressive, obviously. So I started to tackle this like any pathologist would. What can I do to improve things? And I went through a sequence of changes. First of all, which I've written about in other books, I used to have to stop when I attempted to run about every 200 yards, let the blood flow into my calves, and that hurt like crap. And then, of course, my times were terrible. And so I started working on improving my low impact running because I didn't want, the systolic shock wave to be negated by a heel strike. So that helped slightly. Then I worked on relaxing my feet, relaxing my hips, and then I got wider toe box. Then I dumped tube socks. Why anybody would recommend socks that constrict your feet and your legs for this condition, I consider crazy. It just crazy. But anyway, so spreading my feet helped. And then I was doing a lot of body movement training with Rebecca Amos Walsh, and we did some work with yoga toes, spreading my feet. And there's a video about that online, which has 25,000 hits now. But I think it's because Rebecca's more attractive than me. I think that's probably what it is. A lot more attractive than me. Anyway, then and she taught me for a long time, studied continuum with her, body movement. She improved my posture and all those kind of things. And then about 2 years ago, I started to think, well, people assume the heart is a pump. It's actually two pumps, and it sends blood through these passive blood vessels. They are very far from passive. Every blood vessel and every muscle in your body is a pump. Even the capillaries are osmotic pumps. There are pumps everywhere in your body. And I thought, well, how can I'm having problems with my feet because they go numb. And then if a claudication kicked in my calf, my feet would sort of slap the ground. I could hear functionality decaying. So then I'd have to back off on my run. So now I had a measure of how to adjust my rate, my pace. And so I thought maybe I can turn my feet into better pumps. So I did a bit of research on the anatomy of the human foot. Turns out it's 10 muscles in your feet. So why can't I use those as pumps? So first I started by flexing my toes, which would contract muscles in my calves, which would improve venous return. That was the first piece of logic, and that definitely helped. And then I thought about a year or so ago, maybe I can train those muscles in my feet and use them to pump the blood out of my feet. And then I can spread my toes and thus my metatarsals to improve flow through and out of my feet. So I started doing that. It is extremely difficult to do, but once you learn how to do it, you find yourself doing it all the time. I mean, if you learn to play a musical instrument, after a while, I played the flute for years. You don't think about the instrument, you're thinking about the music. So if you can condition your feet to work with your heart, I found dramatic improvement. I can definitely walk up hills, walk as far as I want with no claudication. I do get tired foot muscles as I'm still training them. Running is much, much tougher. And that involves basically understanding the dynamics of the hemodynamics of the foot. And so that's what I'm doing.
That's brilliant. It's fascinating to hear how you've kind of gone through that process of figuring out and applying your previous knowledge to the condition and to the problem, and incrementally working out solutions to the things you're finding, and doing through that. It's clear that you've come from that experimental background and that understanding of pathology. That's brilliant.
Well, one thing which has been encouraging is I've recently had a number of people write to me who watched my YouTube videos. One of them is how to build collaterals on the treadmill. I explained how you need to take an endurance training approach. Don't go real hard at it, then have to stop, hard at it, then have to stop. Think more like the lactate threshold explanation I put in my last book. Take it to the edge. and try to stay there as long as you can. And that will optimize the growth of collaterals. I'm sure that's made a huge difference to my hill walking, dramatic difference. And so when I get people write to me and thank me for my help, it's extremely encouraging. It reminds me of the first letter I got from someone after I wrote my book on my AAA. Back in 2010, I self-diagnosed my AAA, fortunately got a stent. 2011, with the stent, the only person I know in the world, I completed the Lake Placid Ironman with my AAA stent graft. I've seen no interest in that fact from physicians, even though Cook Medical invited me to their labs and I was introduced to the people who built my stent. And so I wrote a little book on it, very poorly written. And I got a letter within weeks from a man in New Zealand and later one from in Russia. The man in New Zealand said, I went to my doctor and he said I had a AAA and it was just like yours. And then he said he was going to put a stent in it, and they did, and it was just like yours. And then the doctor said, well, it's too dangerous to run with the stent, so I recommend you don't run anymore. And he said, I'm 60 years old and I'm known as Jim the Runner. And I read your book and you're doing Ironman with a stent. Fuck it, I'm going to run. He took my advice on how to modify the way he moved, minimizing hip flexion, and he's running again. I changed that man's life. And then I got a similar letter from Russia only weeks later. So that's what makes all this work worthwhile. It's not the money for the books, even though I need it for marketing. It's about helping people.
Brilliant. And
it's
so
amazing. You're lucky we're not on TV. I would have been censored, but it was it would have been well worth it on that one.
I just said what he said. I was quoting.
Yeah. No, that is brilliant, and I think that to have that impact and get those stories back must be so rewarding to kind of feel that you've at least helped some others. But it is, as you say, a shame that it's not being picked up more widely yet, perhaps. But yeah, that's what we can work on next.
Well, what's needed is a clinical trial on my foot technique, and it would be easy enough just to use. I get 100 people, 50 with it, 50 without it, and just run O2 sats with an O2 sats meter within 3 months and see if there's an improvement, because there's actually an improvement in my O2 sats on that right leg after doing this work with the muscles in my feet, because always it would be around about 93%, and now I've got it up at 97, 98. And so it's clearly working in me, but I'm an Ironman distance endurance athlete. And I start to think about how much of this can a regular person do? And they can do quite a bit. They can wriggle their toes. They can wear yoga toes. They can contract the muscles in their feet. They can spread their toes as they lift their feet as they walk. I mean, this isn't rocket science.
No, it's that practice, isn't it? Because I was watching the videos and trying to work my feet in that same ways, and I certainly not as effective as you do it on the video, but I think that's it. It's with practice and with time that you should be able to. Well, it would be interesting to see if the effects would be the same. Because I wondered, do you think there's something, you just alluded to it there, is there something different about you and about your journey that has meant that you've kind of been on the journey that you have been, and that so is it something that perhaps is unique to you and wouldn't be applicable to others?
To me, I think about it like this. If you listen to a professional concert violinist playing a concert, right? It's just amazing. And you're like, are you going to be able to do that? No. But can you get great joy from playing a violin in a small local orchestra? Absolutely. So maybe you can't get as far as I have immediately because of my Ironman training, which was building collaterals all the time anyway, even though I didn't know I had a problem. Why not do something? But to me, the most important part of my work is it empowers the patient to have something to do, because now they can help themselves. If the doctor says, well, we've done all we can, go home and live with it, or go home and go for little walks. No, it's not enough. If they know with some work, maybe it'll take them a while, and it will take them a while, they'll feel they have some power over their life. And I think that is the most important aspect of my work.
That's really cool.
I think that, the response that I've gotten from some of the patients in our network that have connected with Kevin and his book and the techniques that he has used, they find that they see results quicker, some relief quicker than just walking. And I find that very interesting. And I'm wondering if it's because they're helping to build muscle versus just the collateral vessels.
Well, they're also spreading their feet and spreading their toes and getting a big toe box, because tube socks and tight shoes are lethal for this condition, you know? And so I think that's also helping. And also, they're kind of getting involved with the way their body works. I think that helps too, because people's feet get forgotten, but we can use them to climb trees. There was a guy around here with no arms. He could go in a pub and drink a pint of beer with his feet. That shows the potential of our feet that is horribly neglected.
That's actually a really good point. We had a neighbor for a very long time that didn't have any arms, and she was incredible. She was a better cook than I was. I mean, she can work her way around that kitchen, carry pots filled with boiling water, literally with her feet. And the handles were not even customized for her use of the feet. She literally would grab them with her between her big toe and her second toe. It just blew my mind.
Our feet can be like our hands. We don't have prehensile thumbs on our feet, but we can modify the way we use them compared with our hands dramatically. And so, yeah, I just get very frustrated. Why don't the physicians at least give it a try? I don't understand. It's very frustrating. And then I think of Ignaz Semmelweis and his story, my real hero. And I'm thinking it's the same story over again. You know, Ignaz is one of my heroes, amazing man. He was saving women's lives from puerperal fever in response to him explaining to the physicians how they had to change the way they did things just by washing their hands in dilute chlorine. This was before, germ theory even existed. And as he proved that it was correct, they needed to wash their hands between doing necropsies and delivering babies, and it reduced the death rate dramatically. And what did the physicians in the hospital do? They fired him. It's an important story in medicine, a critical story. And when I see the responses I'm getting from people, I published some books on so-called plantar fasciitis, the heel pain, which is really a referred nociceptive pain from the pelvis. When I published that, I threatened a cottage industry, and what I got from podiatrists was insults, direct insults. They called my work the worst kind of trash, but they were dealing with a guy who's trained. I'm not, I've got extensive pathology training. So that's what I got back, and it's never changed. I demonstrated pretty clearly they were wrong. Heel injections are a big mistake. Totally big mistake. But that's a whole nother story. Anyway, that's why I like Ignaz. Ignaz is an amazing man. Long time, an amazing man.
I think there is. You mentioned there that bit about kind of people feeling that they have something to do, and I think that's something that's come across quite strongly in our research as well. So we've been looking at electrical stimulation and walking and how it helps in claudication. And that one of the things that the people who have been involved in our studies have said is that bit of, I just feel that I've been sent home to kind of live with this disease and there's not much I can do. The minute we've provided this TENS machine that we've been using, our electrical stimulation, perhaps the TENS machine, because often a lot of the people are saying, well, the TENS machine didn't really help itself, but it's the kind of what we kind of termed it empowerment, or the permission or the encouragement to take control of this situation and try something. And I think that's resonating with me with your story as well. It's that perhaps, they might not quite have the same response as you. They might not be doing triathlons and Ironmans, but for them in their situation, that empowerment they get from just having a bit of understanding of what's going on in their legs and in their feet, and have something to do about it, will really, really help.
Right.
And I think it also, Kevin, I think that those people that have the debilitating pain, it's lifestyle limiting, not quite to the rest pain that wakes them up at night, but they still, to tell someone with the debilitating pain that has pain when they walk to just go out and walk and push through the pain, sometimes they're just not going to do it because they're scared of their pain. So you provide these exercises that give them good jumping off point. It's something that they can do, they will do while they're still sitting, that will actually have some benefits for them. And maybe when they do start walking, it will make it a little bit easier to walk further and faster because of the strengthening exercises in their feet. Do you find that to be the case in terms of, I see Dr. Seenan nodding?
Are you talking to me or to Chris?
Yes, either one of you.
Well, I think what we need is we need some research, obviously, but it needs to be, but I guess, adapted to the individual patient. So they see a roadmap that will work for anybody, like cooking in the kitchen or whatever, and they know that the best place to start is wiggling your toes. And then the next best place to start is to take off your tight shoes and your tube socks and give your feet some room. And then flex your toes to improve venous return through your calves, which it will. And so you provide a sequence they can handle. If you tell them, well, I do Ironman training. I mean, I had one patient write to me and she said, Kevin, I would rather lose my feet than do an Ironman. And I'm like, I'm not asking you to do an Ironman, but that's how they interpret what you say. This is a marketing problem, not a physical problem. And so when I think about what are the problems I'm trying to tackle, well, to save people's feet and make them have less pain, whatever. But basically, it's really a marketing problem. So what you're doing, and you're obviously more of a marketer than me. I mean, people with Asperger's are terrible at marketing. I mean, we just are. I don't enjoy it.
I think you're better than you think.
Well, I've had a lot of training, with 3 wives. That's another story entirely. But I don't know.
I love you, Kevin.
I just wonder if we can get through to nurse practitioners. If you want advice in the hospital about your condition, don't ask the surgeon. Most of them have autism almost. I mean, they're really Aspergery people. They're incredibly brilliant mechanics, right? The only one I ever met, I think, was Tara Mastracci, who did the work on me when my stent displaced. And she was very in touch with feelings and stuff like that. But I think a lot of the male surgeons less so. I mean, I only know a few. And boy, they're Aspergery people is what they're. They're brilliant mechanics. And so what you're doing is really great marketing, but I can see you struggle to get through to the physicians. Is that right?
I think that everyone, if you're not a doctor, you do struggle to get in front of them and for them to take you seriously. And I think that even more, it becomes the societies that you need the endorsement, from. We were able to, thankfully, due to a vascular surgeon, Dr. Bob Tahara, who believes wholeheartedly in what we're doing, he did endorse our structured walking program and our app and our text, which was a really big deal, which is great. What's the most frustrating for me is that you have this no-cost walking program out there. And I'm even thinking that we should put some videos, but I need to run through, Chris, which videos, might be and which exercises might be appropriate, that we can put some of the videos of some of like the toe yoga and a few of those on the app itself, with a little plug to go to your book to find more. But I am so surprised that that there are very few doctors that are adopting this structured program. And they say, well, because we have the MAs, the PAs, the nurse practitioners, they have so much to do that they can't take 2 seconds to have them just put their phone up to a QR code and submit a request to join the walking program. Like, I just don't understand. They have time to do a procedure. They have time to write a prescription for medicine. But why can't they take the time to write a prescription for walking?
Maybe there's no money in it.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm curious from Dr. Seenan's standpoint, because you guys are leading in research on walking as medicine. And you even have Dr. Thanos Saratzis, who we've been working with on a study, and he just sent me the round 1 results of the study. And it's really about what are the doctors going to offer the patients post-procedure. And it's talking about physical therapy, exercises, and making sure there's education, making sure there's pamphlets available, making sure there's psychological support. I'd never seen that come out in a study before, and that's what they're looking at, is to offer a referral to some sort of psychologist or counselor to work with the person to be able to improve their mental stability so that they can get out there and improve their physical ability as as well. But what are the chances, and I'm curious from your experience, Dr. Seenan, that all of these ideas are actually going to come to fruition in the form of an actual protocol and program for these patients?
I think it will happen, and I think it's on the way. And certainly, it's just very slow and frustrating progress, I guess. And I think you hit the nail on the head there in terms of what we need to understand is why is this not happening? And that's part of the work that we are trying to do at the moment as well, is talking to the healthcare professionals to find out, well, what are the barriers, like, so we know this works. Because Kevin, so you're talking about, we need the evidence there to support what you are doing, and I think that's really important. We definitely need that, but that evidence is there for the structured walking already, and it's that level 1 recommendation within the guidelines. It's established that this works. So if we have something that already has the evidence and yet is not being implemented or not being recommended, why is that going on? So I think that the more we look into that, more we can uncover that. And this work by that's going on in the UK in terms of after surgery is going to be really important to kind of explore that and think about, well, what are the potential options? What should this package be that people are offered post-procedure, but also we need to do that work for pre-procedure as well.
Yeah.
There's a really good book by Cord Murray called Borrowing Brilliance. And his thesis is, if you are trying to solve a problem, and here we have a marketing problem to physicians, you need to find somebody who had a similar problem and solved it and find out how they solved it, because we have a marketing problem. And I've been looking for similar cases, and I'm yet to find one that really fits my bill. But somehow we have to solve, which is what you're doing, but it's going slow. But there must be examples out there that things that really worked. To me, Bell Labs is like the best example of something that really works. And so I've used that as an example when I was working for the pharmaceutical industry, but nobody listened. That was the problem. And so it's funny, Joshua needs to put his hands like this on his screen. You know that thing in England with the brick wall with the face on top of that? You need to do that, Joshua. That's got me distracted.
Yeah.
Just the top of his head. Anyway, so what can we do in the next 20 minutes or so? What do we need to know? I mean, we approve of what each other are doing.
Yeah.
What are we going to do? Give each other an award? That's what they do.
I think one of the things we need to do is as you say, like, map this out in terms of the process. And unfortunately, it's a process that takes time in terms of our current structures and how these things work, but we need to get that evidence. We need to get the proof that your experience and your theories and how you've developed your work can apply to a greater number of people and work in different situations. But at the same time as that, I think that's what you mentioned there about borrowing brilliance is a great approach too, and have a look at other conditions, other similar type of situations where people have made innovations, and why has that worked? What is it? What was the nature of the thing that kind of unlocked the problem? One thing that springs to mind for me, I guess, and being a physiotherapist, and one of our bread and butter is cardiac rehabilitation. For people post heart attack or post cardiac surgery, that everybody gets referred to exercise because they understand that it works. And it's well, why does it happen there but not in PAD, which shares so many so many similarities?
Yeah, I mean, to me, water running is a really good approach, because you take the gravity out of the picture and then you can exercise your legs and it spreads your feet at the same time. And so I got a video explaining how to do that. Zero traction, basically.
And is that, they have to do more research on the water, because what I've been told is that water walking, water running doesn't replace regular walking, because it doesn't trigger that claudication in the same way that is critical to push through in order to maximize your building of collateral vessels.
Well, to me, it does two things. Number one, it gives you general training that you can't get on the ground because of your claudication. So you can get physically fit by doing it. If you do a 1 to 2 hour water run, it will kick your ass. And if you do it without a float aid, which I do, it's a serious workout. And at the same time, if you do it right, it spreads your feet. Have you ever watched a swimmer, the pictures of their feet? It spreads their toes. It does a better job than the yoga toes. So it does those two things. And so to me, that's the reason. It allows you to get your heart rate up. It allows you to get cardio training where PAD prevents you from doing that on the ground.
And we do have a question that is coming in on our YouTube page from Pedro the Wise. He says he got an aortobifemoral bypass, and he had, it says, I'm trying to understand what this says. One branch blocked, so graft removed, had semi-dead leg, 2 years, got a fem coming. Don't even get me started on fems. I think it's time for you, Pedro, to get a second opinion from someone who has different options. It sounds like your surgeon knows how to do surgery, but may not have some advanced techniques that might be an additional option for you. I know very few doctors that will do fems anymore because legs mirror each other. I don't know, Dr. Seenan, or Kevin, if you know what a fem is. It's a fem bypass. You're going from one leg to another. And typically doctors today don't like to do that because the legs mirror each other. And so what they're doing is they're rerouting blood flow from the better leg into the worst leg. But as you know, PAD progresses. And as soon as PAD progresses in the feeding leg, both legs are going to go down at once, and you end up with a bilateral above knee amputation, so a very high amputation. So doctors today have found new minimally invasive methods, different approaches that they can use to try to keep the legs alive. And they're worth considering before you go ahead and get that fem bypass. I can imagine, as he says, walking is very painful, but he says it's actually maintaining his present situation, so it doesn't seem to be getting worse at this point. And that's back to what Dr. Seenan, you were mentioning in the beginning, that maybe in a certain situation the walking may not be improving the prognosis, but at least it could be maintaining them where they are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's interesting in terms of sorry, going back to what Kevin was saying about the aquatic therapy, that's part of that as well, or walking in water, because it's that, as you say, that kind of ability of that type of training to allow you to do more cardiovascularly, it pushes you further in terms of endurance and testing your overall fitness than perhaps you might be able to achieve on land or on a treadmill. So yeah, it's obviously really important to gain the benefits of both.
And it definitely slows progression. I'm sure of that in my case.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
After 10 years, it's only just started on the left leg, the claudication.
And so, Kevin, in terms of, I know that a lot of people in the group are always asking, they feel like they can't relate in a sense because so many of them are in that lifestyle limiting phase, maybe in the early stages of trying to build those collateral vessels. They think that you're just out there and you don't have any pain and you're fine, and you're just not relatable to them. So I wanted you to describe kind of what you go through and how you have to push every day, and you keep working. I mean, you can't really skip a day or two in between, or you're back to square one.
I do take rest days. I do a typical endurance training process. I'm pretty well doing. I walk every day. I've got dogs. We've got 3 dogs, so I walk every day. But my triathlon training is basically 6 days a week, biking and swimming and running and stretching and weight training and all that stuff. And so it's a matter of having some discipline. And the problem with my Ironman background, it intimidates people and they think they can't do anything. And that's not true. They can do a lot, a great deal. I mean, for instance, my swimming helps my cardiovascular. My biking helps cardiovascular, but neither of those do anything for my PAD. I mean, unless I do a seriously hard hill climb on the bike, I get no claudication at all. And if I run down the road for 200 yards, my calf locks up and my feet are numb. So I have to, when I go for a run, the first mile is hell. It hurts a lot as I'm waking up my collaterals. And when I run, I have to walk, run, walk, run. And when I get into further distance, I can run a bit more than I walk. And so I'm constantly training myself to break the 8-hour, 30-minute cutoff for the half Ironman races. I don't know if I ever get to do full Ironman again, but then again, I am 80. I'll be 82 this summer, so I have no complaints. But I go through a lot of pain, but I feel like it's good pain. There are 2 kinds of pain. There's good pain and bad pain that you learn when you're an athlete. Good pain is training. It's just the stuff you do close to the lactate threshold. It grows muscles, it grows endurance, it grows mental attitude, it grows strength in your bones, your muscles, connective tissue, blood vessels, aorta, whatever. And that's good pain, which you have to recognize. Bad pain is where you're going to induce injury and setbacks. And you get to know what that feels like the more you exercise. And so there's a lot people can do, but they need to include cross-training into their program. And that needs to be, adapted to people who have money and people who don't. I mean, if you have money, go to body movement training, do Feldenkrais, whatever. You get into a pool, join a gym. If you don't have money, it's harder. So you have to find a way to do it. If you can't afford any weights, then get a full can of Coke and use that, whatever it takes. So people have to care. And the real problem is definitely mental. It's a mental problem. Can I do this? Am I defeated? If they're defeated, they're dead. And so if they have the mental guts to go ahead, they can do a lot. It doesn't matter about their history or background.
Yeah, and that's what we had a comment that came in just a moment ago from our UK group. And Guy was saying that he wished that there was better mental support. So if you have the mental support and you have someone that's kind of helping you, and it could be even just a coach, helping you to get that mental strength to be able to push through and to have that drive and motivation to get out and do all of these exercises, to do the walking, to do the running, to get in the water, whatever it may be, everything and anything to keep your legs.
Yes, it reminds me of something one of my coaches, Chris Halt, said when he was training me for the Boston Marathon. And he asked how I was doing. And I said, well, I'm pretty tired right now. And you know what he said? Kevin, this is training camp, not complaining camp.
I love that.
I remember that now. Whenever I feel a little like this isn't going well and it hurts a lot, I say, Kevin, this is training camp, not complaining camp, and I push on.
And that's a great way to kind of finish here. And Dr. Seenan, any final thoughts before I ask Kevin to share all of his details so people can find his book?
No, not much. Just a thank you to Kevin for sharing his story, and it's really interesting to talk to you.
Good to meet
Kevin,
you.
where can people actually pick up your book, find out more, follow your newsletter, all that jazz?
The best place to go is my website, which is inspirationalselfhelpbooks.com. On there, you can find the sign-up page. The third page is all about PAD. Right now, most of my books are available on Amazon. The ebooks are available on multiple booksellers, including Barnes and Noble. I'm trying to find a way to publish the paperbacks on other sites because I won't say why, but politically, I really don't want to support Amazon too much because they've become, the 500-pound gorilla. And so I like to sell books, on Barnes and Noble and Google Books and stuff like that. But the best place to find my stuff is on inspirationalselfhelpbooks.com. And on there is the link to my newsletter. And if they sign up to the newsletter and they reply to one of my newsletters, I always speak to people and talk to people who contact me that way. And so it was through my newsletter that I, 18 months or 2 years ago, ceased to be single.
Oh, wow.
I
So for all of you single folks out there,
I tell you that story briefly or not?
sure, go ahead. That could be interesting.
In 2013, I was on Twitter and I had about 1,800 followers. And somebody wrote in, her name was Sue, to say she just had a Lisfranc injury in her foot. She was a runner, and which tore up the medial connections of the middle metatarsal to the ankle bones, which are complex. And she'd had surgery for it. And she wanted to know how she could get back to running after the surgery. And so I responded by writing a long blog post on the issue. I didn't know her at all. I was just really interested in how would you recover from Lisfranc, which is asking a lot. And so I wrote a blog post. And the first thing I wrote in that post, I wrote 10 pieces of advice. Number one was, you have to grieve the past. You have to learn with what you have and forget what you lost. My dog's barking. And anyway, so she liked my advice, which helped her get back to running. And so she followed me for the next 7, 8 years. This was in 2013 when she wrote that. And then she started following my newsletter. And then about 2.5 years ago, she said she was one of my super fans, just encouraging, liked my work. And then I've been living on my own for about 5, 6 years in my garden shed. And a lady friend said, Kevin, you need to get out there. You're turning into a monk. And you mentioned you had a super fan called Sue. Why don't you ask her out for coffee? So I did, through an email. I said, would you like to go for coffee? And she replied, awesome. And then I said, where do you live? And she said, Nixa, Missouri, 1,000 miles door to door. But now I've made a commitment to buy a coffee, and I'm the kind of guy who likes to meet his commitments. Before I drove to Missouri with my dog, I thought, well, I better talk to her. So I called her up. We chatted on the phone, and I thought we'd been talking for about 10 minutes. And then I checked the time. We were talking for 2 hours and 22 minutes. And now we're living together. She moved from Missouri to live with me. We've been living together for a year and getting on fine.
I love that.
Because of Lisfranc.
I love that. Well, that's such a
Great
beautiful
story.
story. Thank you so much,
And my
Kevin.
friend encouraging me to get out there, which I did.
Yes. And it's great because she checks your DP for you too, to make sure that your legs are still doing great.
Right. You're right. She's a nurse who works at UNC now.
Yep, she wants to keep you on your feet.
She keeps telling me not to die. People ask me, how did you live so long? I say, all you do is don't die.
And on that note, remember the advice and views offered are that of our guests. So make sure you always, always, always check with your own healthcare team before acting on any education, information, or advice offered during our programming. You need your own healthcare team's explicit consent first. With that being said, in